Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Joe Mudd.
Joe, it is practically kismet that you're here this week. So, not to put too fine of a point on it right out of the gate, but we had planned for you to be on this episode a week or two ago. And, well, I can't think of a better time than to get somebody to be able to read the YouTube comments on the air than this week. So I'm looking forward to it. Hello, everybody. This is our first episode back after the Craig Duncan interview. And I just want to thank once again Craig for stopping by the show. It was an absolute pleasure talking to him. And like I said, I really can't think of anybody else I would rather have running Rare right now. He's just a stand-up guy, and he's terrific. And I think that came through in the actual interview, if you bothered to listen to the interview. Some people did not, but we'll get into that.
It's on my to-do list.
Oh, Jesus, Joe. Jesus. Hey, well, at least you didn't post about it on an internet forum, before you listened to it. So anyway, yes, we are going to have fun this week. It's going to be an episode that's just going to put a spring in your step. Zippity-doo-dah. Fall is here. Can you tell? I'm in a great mood. Seasonal affective disorder is already nipping at my ass.
I don't get that because I'm just miserable all year round. So.
Oh, well, that's the way to do it, Joe. I mean, unfortunately, I've been trying to do this thing where I'm not depressed, day in, day out, every day of the year. So, unfortunately, when I fall, I tend to fall harder. When I fall, it's like young Bruce Wayne going through that well of bats into the cave. That's how hard I fall when I fall. But I know what will lift me up, what will make me rise, and that is the Patreon. Yes, that's right. DK Vine's on Patreon. Check us out. DKVine.com/Patreon. Lots of awesome lowercase, very muted awesome rewards we have to give if you back us on Patreon. We sweeten the pot a little bit for the $2 and up tier. You get not only access to our Minecraft server, not only every Kongversation episode a day early, but you also get, starting now, our YouTube videos a day early as well. So we had a new video, and our patrons got to see it 24 hours before everyone else. So check that out. Speaking of YouTube, check us out, dkvine.com/YouTube. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter as well. I can't wait to start tweeting with 280 characters. It's going to be very exciting for me because I never know how to keep it brief. Brevity is the soul of wit, but I am the most witless man alive, apparently. We have a hotline, 1-202-630-VINE. That's 8463. Give us a call. Leave us a message. Subscribe to the Kongversation on iTunes. Rate us on iTunes and check us out. You can listen to us on TuneIn, Stitcher, and SoundCloud as well. And finally, tell your friends about the Kongversation, especially if your friend is 90s icon Fabio, because we really, really, really want to get those luscious man tits on the Kongversation. Hashtag bring back the spiders. Check out the Sea of Thieves Insider program so we can play with you in Sea of Thieves. And, hey, Robin Beeland, he survived his bicycle trek. 9 days across the length of Britain. He is alive and back at Rare. So, congratulations, Robin. We're glad you're safe. And I can retire that from the due diligence at long last. He raised quite a bit of money for charity for special effect. And it's terrific. So, congrats, Robin. And finally, I brought up the Houston hurricane relief a couple weeks ago, and another U.S. territory has been absolutely devastated by a hurricane, and that's the island of Puerto Rico. So if you can, check out Puerto Rico Aid. It's just a terrible humanitarian crisis, and not enough Americans care because to them, Puerto Rico is not part of the United States, even though it is. So do what you can there. Let's get to it, Joe. We had Craig Duncan on for a really nice interview, and we didn't really leave too many stones unturned, and we brought up some controversial things as well. And one of the things we discussed was that infamous interview he gave with GameSpot back in 2014, where they took some quotes by him and turned them into salacious headlines where, Craig Duncan doesn't think you want a new Banjo-Kazooie game, etc., etc. So we made light of that and really got into what his philosophy is for Rare at the present time. And, one of the things he brought up was how if Rare is, going to do one of their classic franchises like Banjo-Kazooie, it can't just be making a high definition version of Banjo-Kazooie without any, anything to evolve the formula. And right now, like Sea of Thieves is the direction that the team wants to go in. And, Sea of Thieves, like I said, if once you play it, you'll understand. It's just a brilliant, brilliant game that really captures the spirit of Rare. But after Craig explained that they wouldn't be revisiting a old franchise unless they had the creative spark to do so, we joked that gaming news sites would take that headline or take that quote and turn that into a negative headline because it's easy content for them. And yeah, it was just a funny off the cuff remark. But come to find out, that's exactly what happened, thanks to our good friends at IGN. Oh yeah. So
yeah.
what IGN did quite helpfully was they did an article and one of those just videos where they recite the content of that article just to have cheap video content and to tie into like metrics and like ad buys, and basically puts more money in their coffers doing it this way. Whatever. But they provided these quotes by Craig Duncan, and initially they didn't say or provide any context about where these quotes were from. So it looked like Craig Duncan just rang up IGN and said, I want to tell you something about Banjo-Kazooie right now. We're not going to do one. And
was he drunk at the time by any chance?
Well, I think that's the impression that article would give people. And they didn't give any context that this came from DK Vine's Kongversation podcast, which whatever, I'm not looking for any plug from IGN, especially when they're just fishing for controversy. I think anybody who actually took the time to listen to what he said, even if you're a diehard Banjo fan who desperately wants a new Banjo game, or Perfect Dark, or Cameo, or Conquer, or any of the other
Mr. Pants.
Mr. Pants, absolutely. 80% of everybody who listens to the conversation was waiting with bated breath for him to announce a sequel to It's Mr. Pants. But I think anybody who actually listened to it with open mind would completely get what he said. I mean, you know me, Joe. I'm one of the biggest diehards for this bullshit, out of anybody. And it doesn't bother me. It's like, no, I don't want you guys doing a new Banjo-Kazooie game if you've got nothing to say about a new Banjo-Kazooie game. I don't want Greg Mayles to have to design something he has no passion for, or, Joe Neat to head up something he doesn't want to do, or, Mike Chapman.
I think Yooka-Laylee is proof enough that trying to harken back to the days of Banjo-Kazooie is going to come with a lot of backlash, which we'll go into later.
You're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, I think it's much better and healthier for them to try something new, and Sea of Thieves, from what I can see, looks like something that's never really been done before. As far as I'm concerned, Godspeed to Rare.
Right. And I think, anybody who went into it with an open mind or some sort of degree of reasonability would understand that. And I'm not telling people how they should think. Obviously, you're going to feel what you feel. But I don't know. I'm getting old, Joe. I just can't be outraged over every little thing anymore. My joints hurt when it rains. It's getting to that point. Anyway, IGN eventually updated the article with correction. They sourced us, but by then, the damage had already been done. Luckily, this all happened on Friday, and I don't want to relitigate any of this, but Fridays are kind of the news dump day where people tend to forget about any story you release late on a Friday because their weekend is beginning and they're just going to, it's going to be pushed out of the brain space before long.
Yeah.
So
people talk about the news like around the water cooler at the office, not when they're out getting pissed.
Right. Well, I do, but that's why nobody wants to drink with me, which is why I drink when I'm doing the conversation now.
Me too. I'm not dry. By the way, everyone, my dryness has cleared up. I'm now well lubricated this time.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. I
assume you remember the gag from last time. Otherwise, that sounds completely weird out of context.
I can't wait for the Joe's Intervention episode of the Conversation. That should arrive on my bachelor party. So IGN did source us. So we got some links from IGN as well as NeoGAF, which is where I believe IGN found us to begin with. So all that being said, there were people who went into the YouTube link for the episode itself. It's funny to me that we're always linked on YouTube whenever one of these news sites quotes the conversation, because YouTube is like the absolute smallest audience we have for the conversation. We've got thousands of people who listen on all the various podcast networks like iTunes and yeah,
but to be fair, YouTube has more angry, opinionated people than anywhere else on the internet.
Right. So if you want to send angry people your way, you send them to YouTube. It just cracks me up that whenever these the big boys want to play with the conversation, it's always the YouTube show without any video, the conversation. So we got some agitated people who came into that YouTube link ready to fight. And I don't know if anybody stuck around and listened to the episode. I hope they did. We got some new YouTube subscribers out of it, so I'm hoping maybe some people came in like ready to like blow a gasket, sat down and listened to the episode, and liked what they heard, or decided, hey, there's a YouTube channel dedicated to all of this nonsense that I like. I'm gonna check these guys out. Whatever, I'm trying to look at the glass half full, or in this case, the Angry Orchard bottle half full. So in any regard, people did leave some colorful YouTube comments, Joe, and I was so relieved when I saw that, because I knew you were going to be with us on this episode. And, it's a tradition now. You've got to read the YouTube comments. So this will help us segue into the actual topic of this episode. So, which is criticism of the Donkey Kong universe, both past and present. So what better way to begin that story topic than to get into the most present criticism we can get, and that's these juicy YouTube comments. Joe, take us away.
Okay, well, first, CamJoe12 says, "Oh snap, my question got read. Just so Craig doesn't get the wrong idea, I think Sea of Thieves is fantastic. I loved what I played at the technical alpha. I just hope that the focus on innovation and uniquely rare games doesn't stifle the potential for beloved series to return someday. I totally understand that wanting to just go, let's make a Banjo game and figure out what makes it special as we go along, but at the same time, if Nuts and Bolts never existed and 2017 Rare had come up with the innovative idea of Lego-style vehicles in a 3D platformer, would that idea still have organically turned into a Banjo game? And of course, nobody wants Rare to turn into a sequel machine. If they stuck to the same franchises forever, there wouldn't be a Perfect Dark or Battletoads to beg for at all, and we'd currently be getting the epic shared world skiing experience Slalom of Thieves. A balance of the old and new is all I'm looking for." I do think that if Nuts and Bolts had just been a new thing and had nothing to do with Banjo-Kazooie, I think it might have done a hell of a lot better, because people who play the game love it, really. It's always going to have that horrible dark cloud of it's not Banjo 3 lingering over its head, but it's a game that I've replayed several times, and I'm planning to replay again quite soon. And I think it could have been like Viva Pinata. It could have been a massive hit for 5 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think Nuts and Bolts was a game that was ahead of its time, and we'll discuss Nuts and Bolts a little bit later in the episode when we talk about criticisms of the Donkey Kong universe. But I think it was a couple years too early, really, and unfortunately, just bad timing, which seems to be up until this point, up until like Rare Replay, bad timing has been the unfortunate history of Rare with Microsoft. They just, but yeah, and I believe that was Cameron Perry who called in, or not called in, but wrote in last week. And one of the email questions we selected. So thanks. And that was a positive comment, Joe. I'm feeling pretty good about this. I was really kind of dreading this, but hey, if they're all that great, then what's there to worry about?
Yep. Shall we scroll on? CyberN says, top form interview there. Great to know the head of Rare is so nice and down to earth. Just a shame there wasn't more time for Q&A. Aww. Another nice one.
Hey, 2 in a row. What could go wrong?
Columbia says, I want Perfect Dark 2 and Jet Force Gemini 2. I don't care about Sea of Thieves. Come on! Okay, good for you.
There's hordes of people out there demanding Jet Force Gemini 2.
This comment looks like it's written by someone who's enjoyed a certain export of Columbia. There's all those exclamation marks. Anyway, next one is Hierophant Green, that hieroglyph elephant, I suppose. Says, that's okay, New Rare. We don't want you touching your old IPs either. Oh my god. Because of all the talent left 2 decades ago, please feel free to keep making your doo-doo garbage pirate game that will become boring as shit 3 hours in. Okay, I think they will.
I can't believe it took to the 4th YouTube comment till we got all the good ones that have left. And 2 decades ago, too. They left in 1997, Joe. I mean, before Diddy Kong Racing even came out, they left. They made GoldenEye and they split.
I was going to say Donkey Kong Land 3, but okay. Smarmy Smurf says a by the numbers Banjo 3 would sell better than Sea of Thieves is going to. Fuck you, Craig Duncan, you condescending asshole. It's you who doesn't know what we want. Innovation is less than, 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 is less than fun.
Wow, yeah. Craig Duncan is so condescending. You heard it. Well, you heard him, people. He's how smug was that guy?
And I have to agree, innovation is not as good as fun. I mean, after all, the most fun thing in the world is doing the same thing over and over again.
I think a healthy balance between innovation and fun is the way to go. Again, you haven't played Sea of Thieves, though. You would realize you don't get tired of it 3 hours in. Well, the technical alpha sessions usually last 3 hours long, and you're always upset when they're over because it feels like you just got started. But okay.
You sound like my ex-wife now.
What, you doing a borscht belt routine, Joe? What is this?
I've lost complete faith in Rare, says Michael Laverty. Michael Lavatory. Do some market and customer research and come back to me. I would honestly not be surprised to see them go bust. Microsoft's money is all that is saving them now. Out of touch. Thank God they don't have Donkey Kong.
Again, Rare is one of the most profitable studios under Microsoft Games and in the Xbox division. Okay. I don't know. I
hope all of these people leave an angry comment under the next video.
Yeah. Bring it on. We'll just keep getting Joe in here. Keep reading the YouTube comments.
I could do a weekly section. I wouldn't mind, actually.
Thanks for listening, everybody, or thanks for reading IGN's article and then stopping by to share your remarks. Sorry, Craig. I felt like we did a good interview with you, and I'm sorry that people took it and ran with it. And hopefully that won't dissuade anybody inside the industry from ever sitting down with us again. Because, I mean, what are you going to do?
Sorry, that ship sailed a long time ago.
People have short attention spans, unfortunately. So to sit an hour and 20-minute podcast in front of them and say, hey, listen to this. It's so much easier to get some out-of-context quotes in an article, unfortunately. Anyway, well, let's discuss then criticisms of the Donkey Kong universe, Joe. And
yes.
I guess the YouTube comments would be a good place to start, and that is that Rare doesn't make any games for their old IPs anymore. Okay, so this is something that obviously people are, or at least were, upset about. Some people. And once upon a time, like in the Kinect Sports era, I desperately wanted, a new Banjo game or a new Conquer game. And yeah, I still one day do want new Banjo and new Conquer games. But it's also kind of like the people who want retro studios to make nothing but Metroid games. And it's kind of... I understand you like something, you want more of it. I get it. And I'm the same way. But there's also this element that you don't want to water something down and make it less special. And I love... Let's talk about the Banjos here. So I love Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. I love Nuts and Bolts, but for different reasons. I wouldn't want there to be a Banjo 3E that people at Rare just were making because they were chained to their desk, being forced to make it because
Absolutely.
They have to churn out a sequel, like so many of these other studios who have to do the annual or biannual title in the franchise. It's a $1 million franchise. We can't let it grow fallow. We have to just keep it going, keep it going, keep it going.
Do we really want new Super Banjo-Kazooie U?
Well, that's the extreme situation where it's just completely voided of personality, and it's just completely... You can see right past the fabrication of it all that it's just very, very soulless. And no offense to the people who like the new Super Mario Brothers games, but there is a certain painting by numbers there, in my opinion. And
I don't think anyone can deny that, even if you're a fan.
Here's the thing about Rare that people seem to forget, and unfortunately, Rare's massive success in the 1990s kind of damned them a little bit moving forward into the modern era of gaming, in that Rare is not Nintendo. Rare is a studio. They're a pretty big studio, but they are a studio. To make modern video games requires hundreds of people. They can't just break off into teams of 12 to 30 people anymore, make a game in a year and a half and release it and release 4 to 6 games a year. That's not how games are really made anymore, with the exception of like the indie studios. And that's, best case scenario. And even they don't have the prolific output that Rare had, So like you can make games with small teams, but, even it took Playtonic, 2 years to release Yooka-Laylee, and they're still working on a Switch version. So I think people think Rare that they're larger than they are, and people also have misconceptions about like how Nintendo makes games. So yeah, there's always new Mario 3D platformers in development every generation. There's always a new Zelda every generation, but Miyamoto himself isn't really involved in those projects. I mean, he oversees them, but there's new teams doing that work while he does his own thing. Even Nintendo doesn't chain their developers to a single franchise if they don't want to be doing that franchise. And Nintendo is a corporation with many, many studios and teams underneath them. Rare is a studio. So the way we would get a new Banjo or Conquer or Perfect Dark or Cameo or Viva Pinata or Jet Force Gemini even, more than likely would be if somebody else in Microsoft Games developed it. And we saw what happened. Look, I loved Conker's Big Reunion, Conker's dalliance with Project Spark. I thought it was terrific and true to the spirit of Conker, and I thought it was amazing that they were able to replicate Conker's world so faithfully with the Project Spark engine.
It seemed really promising, didn't it?
People hated it, though. I mean, outside of those with open minds, people just downvoted the fuck out of that on YouTube and dismissed it outright. And yes, Young Conker, the trailer looked terrible, but I've been watching playthrough videos, walkthroughs of Young Conker, and it's honestly a little intriguing now. Like, I can look past the shit character design of Young Conker and think there might be something to this, and I want to actually check it out when I can. That doesn't mean that Rare couldn't oversee the project like Miyamoto oversees anything involved with Mario or Zelda, to an extent, you know. I don't know how much involved he is with Zelda anymore, but, you know, he definitely consults. He sticks his head in every now and then. So you have to think of Rare like a team. I don't know, like the days where they can release in 1 year, you know, GoldenEye, Diddy Kong Racing, or, you know, in another year they release Jet Force Gemini, Donkey Kong 64, Conker's Pocket Tales even. I mean, those days are over. It's restructured for the modern era of gaming. Sea of Thieves is a modern game. It's not something that you would have ever seen on the N64. And I don't know. It's such a frustrating argument that people just want to hear the greatest hits when the artist is still capable of producing so many like new wonderful songs that might become your new favorites. And, you know, Craig Duncan had a great point on the last episode, and he said, you know, once upon a time, people would have viewed Banjo-Kazooie and Conker with the same suspicion they now view Sea of Thieves, because they were new properties. And that's absolutely true. Like I told him, I was initially upset when they announced Banjo and Conker because I wanted 3D Donkey Kong right then and right there, and I thought they were betraying me as a fan. And what a ludicrous argument, because then I would have never gotten two of my favorite game franchises ever. And Sea of Thieves is now one of my favorite games of all time, even though it's not even out yet. So, I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is just, we're going to go round and around and around with this, but I think it's a silly, selfish argument to make that I want this studio, who I'm purportedly a fan of, to just make the same kind of game again and again and again. I love the characters Banjo, I love Conker, I love the world they inhabit, which, by the way, is the same world as Sea of Thieves, but whatever. But I mean,
there's plenty of goldfish in that sea.
Saltwater goldfish, a rare archipelago staple. No, I love those characters, the vast cast of characters, but I'm a bigger fan of the people making those games, the people behind those characters. And, you know, you can tell yourself that all the good ones at Rare have left. That's false. We've gone over the litany of names that are still at Rare from the N64 days, and all of the wonderful talent that joined in the last decade or just in the last couple of years.
It's a fascinating argument, that, because how do you know which ones are good and which ones are bad? How do you know who designed which? I don't know. When you think about it, it's an argument that makes no sense.
It's a pacifying argument to make because it comforts yourself in, say you didn't buy an Xbox. Say you are a Nintendo loyalist and you don't want to buy an Xbox. It's easier to tell yourself, well, the good ones at Rare no longer work there, so I don't have to worry about Rare anymore. I was a big fan of their stuff, but the company is essentially dead to me. It's a lie I think people tell themselves. Even though if they actually gave a lot of those games on the Xbox a shot, they would see the same kind of magic, and they would have new types of fun that they're kind of depriving themselves.
When I briefly played Rare Replay, well, I say I've played it on and off here and there, one thing I've noticed about all the games on there is all of them feel very kind of ahead of their time.
Yeah.
And just very, very much like every Rare game feels like they've tried something a bit different, and they've really pushed the boat out and done good graphics, good concept. And I look at Sea of Thieves, and it gives me that same feeling that they're doing something a bit different that hasn't been done before that looks fantastic.
Yeah. And I think people overlook that Rare always kind of pushed the boundaries of whatever they did. I don't know, at a certain point, do we just want what we got as kids? Like, do we want to stop experiencing new things? Are we so stuck in the mud, no offense, Joe, that that we don't want to have that same kind of the joy of childhood discovery anymore? I don't know. I realize I'm the guy who really only makes time for games that DK Vine covers, but that's because I really don't have much time, to really branch out and try different types of games. I want to be a more well-versed gamer, but if I'm only going to focus on Rare and the Donkey Kong universe, then I'm going to be grateful whenever Rare gives me something new. And, this argument that, Rare doesn't make Rare games anymore, I think was only applicable in the Kinect Sports era. And Kinect Sports was the best game of its type, that whole trilogy was. But, obviously, Kinect Sports didn't feel like a Rare game in the way that we understand Rare games to be. Although that kind of changed as the trilogy went on, and they got more and more leeway to kind of sneak that shit back in. To the point where Kinect Sports Rivals had, basically a full-fledged cameo or off-screen cameo by Mumbo and other Rare characters. I don't know. I mean, Sea of Thieves has that Rare spirit, It's completely oozing from every pore. So does it really matter if you're not controlling a bear? Does it really matter if you're not fighting a poo monster? No. Come on. It's a fun game. And it's
and I think we've seen
game.
I think we've seen as of late that it doesn't matter if you're playing as a bear or a green lizard. You still have a fun game.
Next.
We might as well get to the next point then, and that's Yooka-Laylee. So this is our next criticism, and it's funny how people are up in arms or can get up in arms about what kind of games Rare is not making and what kind of games they supposedly want them to make, when we just got a very, very faithful Rare-esque 3D platformer in the mold of Banjo-Kazooie. And apparently it didn't revolutionize the 3D platformer enough, Joe. And so, like I said before, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So let's talk about the criticisms of Yooka-Laylee. And we haven't even given, our final words on Yooka-Laylee yet, because we're still waiting on the Switch version. We're still waiting on potential DLC. But, Joe, I mean, since the last time...
We're still waiting for the 64-bit mod.
That's right. But, Joe, since the last time we discussed Yooka-Laylee on the Conversation, the Spit and Polish patch was released for the console versions. And I've been playing Yooka-Laylee a lot more as a result, because I didn't have a problem with all the minor problems that existed with the game prior to the Spit and Polish patch. But my God, after that patch, it just completely gives the game this breath of fresh air, where all of the little tiny annoyances that I wasn't getting me down, now that they're gone, I'm I feel almost liberated in a way that I didn't realize I needed to be liberated. And the game is just so much fun to just run around in, to dick around in. It's honestly a little bit hard to go back to Banjo-Kazooie as a result, because Yooka and Laylee, they move so quickly and crisply. The play control is so on point that Banjo-Kazooie feels a little bit of a product of its time. It's a little bit sluggish now, and I hate feeling like that.
I always think Kazooie is quite clunky, and then Tui is just the worlds are so big, it takes forever to walk anywhere. It's so big and barren.
Yeah, where Yooka, you're moving like a double speed, even without any special moves, in comparison to Banjo. And so Yooka-Laylee, it didn't necessarily revolutionize the 3D platformer. It's like really only and I hesitate to use the word gimmick because it seems like it's derogatory, and it's not. But its only gimmick really was the whole expanding worlds concept, which they didn't really follow through with it as much as I would have hoped they did. It kind of felt a little bit like a half-completed idea. But regardless, even if it doesn't revolutionize anything or doesn't like give us a forward leap from Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, I still love the hell out of Yooka-Laylee, Joe. I think it's a terrific game. And here's the important point, and the difference between what Rare is doing and what Playtonic's doing. Rare wants to do something new in the Rare spirit. So we get Sea of Thieves, which is fantastic. Playtonic promised the fans who wanted a return to those classic Rare games a faithful experience, and they delivered. Yooka-Laylee feels like what Banjo-Kazooie would feel like if it got polished with a modern coat of paint and modern controls. And we are having our cake and eating it too, and yet it's not enough because people are fucking hating on Yooka-Laylee. And not just like professional game critics, but the very people who backed Playtonic, who were gung-ho. And, you know, I'm painting with a broad brush here, obviously, but the amount of backlash that Yooka-Laylee got is kind of staggering, and I knew it would happen. I was hoping it wouldn't, but I knew it would happen because people hyped the hell out of that game and treated it like it was going to be the second coming of not just Banjo-Kazooie, but of Christ himself. And because the game disc can't walk on water, because it just merely floats, people are just not having it. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I kind of I feel like it's like they say, you should never give the fans what they ask for, because as soon as you give it to them, they'll realise that that's not what they wanted after all. Maybe they don't know best.
Maybe Craig Duncan was right. But I think it's so unfair to Yooka because they delivered exactly what fans are asking for. And when I play Yooka-Laylee, it is a very nostalgic shot of joy and adrenaline. And I love it, but obviously I'm a gamer of the 90s, you know? But it just shows that you can't please everybody all the time.
Yeah, see, I love it. I can see it's flawed, but that doesn't make it a bad game. And personally, I think it's exactly what I wanted.
Right.
And what I expected.
The important distinction to make is it's not just New Super Mario Brothers. They actually did put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah.
To avoid it just being a reskin Banjo. I mean, obviously it borrows heavily from Banjo and some other Rare platformers, but it also feels like it has enough new ideas in there to keep it, pardon the term, fresh. So I don't know. It's disheartening to me because, again, I knew this would happen, but I don't know. Like,
I think the best way to give fans what they want, and that's the thing, to make a Kickstarter that's built on, do you remember that thing that you liked in the 90s? We're doing that again. Give money to us and we'll make it. I think a game that's actually managed to pull that off and have its cake and eat it is Undertale, which I've harped on about non-stop recently, I'm aware. But that's a game that basically you look at it and go, oh, this looks just like Earthbound. I want to buy that then because I want to play another Earthbound game. And then you play it and realise that it doesn't just do that. It goes way deeper than... It looks like Earthbound, but it does something much, much deeper and much more complex and interesting when you play it. And then you realise that was just bait to pull you in. And I think maybe it's something that perhaps Yooka-Laylee could do, is it could go off on a tangent. Hey, maybe they should put vehicles in it. They should have some kind of innovative concept and put it in and go off on a bit of a tangent while still retaining that Banjo-Kazooie throwback sheen to convince people to buy it. And then when they... I don't know, I'm really trying to make this not sound like nuts and bolts, and it's just sounding like nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like I said, I really feel like this is the best time to be a Rare fan because we've got Rare and Playtonic to scratch both itches. and it's just not enough for people. I don't know. It's unfortunate.
Next.
All right, well, let's go back a little bit, Tim, to talk about some early criticisms of the Donkey Kong universe and Rare. And this one is one that was bandied about. You really started to see it in the late 90s, early 2000s, but then especially when the buyout was being rumored and actually happened, and there were a lot of Nintendo loyalists who were looking for justifications why it didn't matter that Rare was being sold. And this was before they settled on all the good ones that Rare have left. Before, what was it, Free Radical gave them cover to do that. I think that was the first studio comprised of some people who left Rare that made them say, oh, those were the good ones at Rare, the ones that made all of the games I liked. I'm not going to look at the end credits. The criticism I'm referring to, though, is that Rare didn't make any games that were innovative, that they merely cloned Nintendo's brilliant titles and made inferior versions of that, but they were basically riding the formula that Nintendo perfected and hoodwinking people into buying their games, tricking them into thinking that there was anything worth saying with Diddy Kong Racing or Banjo-Kazooie or, yes, Donkey Kong Country. So, Joe, this one you don't really hear anymore because obviously Rare hasn't been with Nintendo for 15 years, and they haven't made any returns to those types of games in quite a while, in basically a decade, longer than a decade if you discount Nuts and Bolts. And Nuts and Bolts was very innovative, but people, hated it for that reason. So...
I guess what Rare has done with games like Diddy Kong Racing, Banjo-Kazooie, it's like Nintendo creates something and Rare refine it. Like Super Mario World, easy enough, just a bit of platforming. Then Donkey Kong Country is just a a richer experience. If that makes sense, it's more complex, it's more difficult, and it challenges the player a bit more. Like, I think Diddy Kong Racing is the best example because I think that's the one that's closest to like Mario Kart, like to the extent that people could say it was just a Mario Kart knockoff. But then Diddy Kong Racing is, are you sick of just doing races that are based on luck? Do you want to win because you're good at the game, not because you got lucky?
Ironically, Diddy Kong Racing started life as a revived RC Pro-Am game, and RC Pro-Am predated Super Mario Kart. So it's just funny how people just assume that was Rare taking Mario Kart 64 and skewing it, but it was just a coincidence that it basically shared a development cycle with Mario Kart 64 and then came out later that same year. But there would have been no turnaround time to just clone Mario Kart 64 and add an adventure mode.
And likewise, Banjo-Kazooie is called a Mario 64 ripoff, but look at Project Dream. Look how many different iterations that went through. How many times they reinvented the wheel, and then what they ended up with was similar to Mario 64, but if anything, production probably predates that game.
Well, they did use Super Mario 64 as inspiration because Project Dream was something that they were just kind of spinning their wheels with, and they looked at Super Mario 64 and be like, okay, so what if we applied some of that DNA to our project? What could we come up with? I think that people were pretty unfair, and this is where, like, again, it's people have this loyalty to a brand, and hey, I'm loyal to the Rare brand, but I'm willing to call them out when a game is shit. Banjo Pilot,
yeah.
But people who are loyal to the Nintendo brand, had to come up with some justification why they why they could disown Banjo and Conquer and even Donkey Kong Country, even though Nintendo owned the rights to that. The way I always looked at it when this criticism was leveled at Rare was Nintendo would come up with great ideas and game structures. With some exceptions, they would kind of create this basic template and then not really take them to their full potential. One of our infamous criticisms of Super Mario 64, which is a very fun game, revolutionary, groundbreaking game, is that it was a glorified tech demo, which is unfair and hyperbolic. But in comparison to something like Banjo-Kazooie or Banjo-Tooie, a little bit true, you know?
It feels like a lot of effort has gone into building the world and the characters of Banjo-Kazooie. Whereas Mario 64, the characters are owl or ball, pre-rendered ball with eyes and feet.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like Super Mario 64 basically had to create a genre from scratch. And because of that, it didn't really have time to have much in a way of nuance. Where Banjo-Kazooie could then take what Super Mario 64 got started and say, okay, and here's where we fill in all these little empty areas that Nintendo and Miyamoto didn't really have time to get around to. And that was what was brilliant about Rare, in that they were like the ultimate wingman for Nintendo. Nintendo would come up with an idea and kind of prove the idea could work, and Rare would say, okay, and here's how we're going to make that idea even better and more fulfilling. And, you know, you can argue, you know, oh, is Super Mario 64 really a lesser game than Banjo-Kazooie? Really, it's a matter of personal preference. But I would dismiss you sight unseen if I had any inclination that you thought that Banjo-Kazooie was not a worthy game because it builds off of Super Mario 64. I think that's nonsense. And I don't know. I feel like, you know, Diddy Kong Racing, Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong Country, the whole trilogy, which, you know, really built off of Super Mario World out of the Mario platformers. But Nintendo's library would be a lesser entity without them. And you look at, you know, what the possibilities for the Nintendo 64 Classic will be without any of Rare's games on it, minus Donkey Kong 64. And it's just kind of sobering how much of the strength of the Nintendo library of the mid to late 90s was based off of Rare doing this formula. And I don't know. I think people, when they bring up this criticism, they're just, again, trying to pacify themselves, but they're really just depriving themselves of the joy of some excellently crafted games.
Absolutely.
Next.
When people bring up the Rare formula of perfecting what Nintendo did, Star Fox Adventures kind of has that asterisk next to it because it's ostensibly built off of Zelda's skeleton, but I think only the most absolutist Rare fan would say that they enjoy Star Fox Adventures more than, say, Ocarina of Time. And hey, I love Star Fox Adventures, and I think it's a fine game, and I'm loath to criticize it, but yeah, Ocarina of Time was a more accomplished game. Star Fox Adventures obviously was rushed a little bit because they had to get it under that sliding door that was the buyout, and it just made it underneath and was able to get its hat underneath the door a la Indiana Jones before the buyout shut down the potential of it coming out. But Star Fox Adventures is a fine game. It's no Zelda, but does everything need to be like better? Like, okay, so this is one of my complaints about people. And again, I brought this up with your Yooka-Laylee episodes, but this is something that you see in any fan critiques of anything nowadays. It's if something isn't 100% flawless, a masterpiece that has no blemishes whatsoever, then it's immediately derided as shit. Everybody's become such a, in their mind, erudite critic that we can have no room for liking something that's good, even if it's not perfect. And Star Fox Adventures definitely falls into that category. It's not perfect because of the circumstances around its release. Not because that they injected Star Fox into Dinosaur Planet. That really didn't have any bearing on its quality. It was that they had to get the game done, and they cut some things like the General Scales fight, for example. Star Fox Adventures, this is one of those things where I think people just got lazy. Even Rare fans got lazy and just let people bash Star Fox Adventures. That was the okay. You can have Star Fox Adventures. You can bash it. Whatever. We're too tired defending everything else in Rare's output that we're not going to stick up for poor SFA. What are your thoughts on Star Fox Adventures, Joe?
I didn't play it for very long, and I kind of had to pawn it, sadly, shortly after I bought it, because I had to raise money for my exhibition a couple of years ago. I can appreciate that it's not perfect, and I can appreciate that Star Fox fans probably were like, what the hell? Where are the spaceships? I'm not flying around in a spaceship. This has nothing to do with our series. I think a big part of the criticism of Star Fox Adventures, maybe not so much now, but a couple of years back, a lot of people hated on the game because JonTron said it sucked. And just like nuts and bolts, for a time, before he turned out to be a fucking racist, the internet was full of screaming JonTron fanboys who took his word as the gospel. And this is when I did my final year at university, and I was talking about what games I liked. My roommates were gobsmacked, like, what? You like Star Fox Adventures? But JonTron says that game sucks. You like Banjo Nuts and Bolts? But JonTron said. You think Project Spark is going to be good because Kongversation? But JonTron said. And now I can say, you know what? JonTron said a lot of things. Do you think he's right about them too?
Yeah. Without kind of going over the whole JonTron controversy again, it is kind of a relief that his empire has kind of collapsed. As a Rare fan, somebody who identifies loudly and proudly as a Rare fan, because for the longest time, JonTron was the face of the Rare fan community, even though he wasn't a part of the Rare fan community. And so whenever I would be out in real life talking with people about games, and I, brought up Rare or, what I do with DK Vine, I would inevitably be asked, oh, have you seen JonTron's Nuts and Bolts video? Oh, man, it's hilarious. And I just kind of have to grimace through my teeth. I'm like, I think Nuts and Bolts is getting a critical reevaluation in the light of the fall of the House of Tron. Because, and I think enough time has passed, and especially, some people are content getting Yooka-Laylee. Okay, I have this type of game I wanted out of a Banjo 3. I also have Rare Replay. Let me check out Nuts and Bolts at long last. I got, I basically paid $1 for Nuts and Bolts with Rare Replay. So, yeah, I own it. I might as well try it. And then they discover, I like it. We were very hard on Nuts and Bolts when it came out, and mostly due to the piss poor PR campaign where they did hoodwink fans into thinking this is going to be a 3D modern Banjo platformer on the Xbox 360. And then there's kind of a bait and switch where, whoops, it's vehicle based. It's actually a completely different kind of genre. That was very bad marketing on Microsoft and Rare's part, and I will admit to that. But it's like Jungle Beat. Me and Jungle Beat. I'm able to go back and play Jungle Beat, even though the marketing for that game was offensive as a Donkey Kong Country fan. I can go back and say, holy shit, Jungle Beat is a phenomenal game. And you can go back and say, hey, Nuts and Bolts was ahead of its time and it's very fun. No, it's not Banjo 3, but I get to play this great game and there are characters in it I love, in this world that I love. So
I'd say, wouldn't it be nice if more people actually developed an opinion of these games by playing them?
Right. And we're one of the downfalls of online culture, which I generally think, the internet is one of the greatest inventions of mankind, but one of the downfalls of it and the kind of society that it builds around it is that people always want to be viewed as correct. Nobody wants to have egg on their face. Nobody wants to say, oh, my bad, I was wrong. And I have to do it all the time on DK Vine, unfortunately. So because, I have 18 years of output out there for anybody to see. So yeah, whoops, I was wrong about that. Whoops, I have shit for brains. But people are unable to say, whoops, I was wrong. And they always want to be on the winning side. So when somebody with a cult following like JonTron had says nuts and bolts is shit and it's offensive as a Banjo and Rare fan, then that becomes the viewpoint that is correct. And it's unfortunate. And yeah, look, I wasn't happy about nuts and bolts. I can admit, though, that I really wish I had given it a fair shake back in 2008 because I think had I gone into it with an open mind and the clarity that really age and the passage of time brings, I would have really appreciated what we had back then, which is one reason why, I'm really making the most out of Yooka-Laylee right now because life is too short, and if I have something fun in front of me, I'm not going to look for flaws. I want to have fun with it.
Yeah, I think eventually you'll one day you might grow to love nuts and bolts. I find just like many games which involve building things, you can sit there for hours and hours and hours. You can get completely hooked on it.
Yeah, and like I said, it was ahead of its time. It was before, obviously Lego has always been popular, but I think Lego really blew up.
Well, it would work really well now if it were an expansion pack for Minecraft.
Yes.
Minecraft vehicles, yeah.
Well, you had Lego, and then you had Minecraft, and I feel like Nuts and Bolts was just a couple years too soon, and people just didn't appreciate it, especially the audience that the Xbox 360 had cultivated. One of our biggest complaints about Rare being on the Xbox hardware, the first two generations of Xbox hardware, was that it was seen as the dude bro system, and to a certain extent I think Xbox is still viewed as the dude bro system, but I think since Phil Spencer took over in 2014, there's been a deliberate kind of backpedaling away from that image, and they have been able to bring in some new fans that aren't like the frat guy kind of stereotype that play Xbox games.
Yeah, well, with basically no influence in Japan, they have to appeal to Western gamers, and what is the majority of those? Young blokes. So the dude bro thing is the best market, the best angle, really.
In our live stream right now, DK Vine, Stafford, and creator of Twin Peaks, David Lynch, brought up that Nuts and Bolts even had all the good people at Rare have left joke in it. This was 2008, so this shows you that it was already ingrained in the video game culture at the time. The quote was, "Wow, there are a lot of people at Rare, although I heard that all the real talent left years ago." And that was during the credits. So thanks for bringing that back up, David.
Just one of 10 billion meta jokes in Nuts and Bolts about the game, its production, and the fans.
Memechi is also in the live stream right now, and he said the issue personally is that people leave studios all the time, and it's a thing that happens everywhere. Microsoft had a game last year that was touted as from the people who made Metroid Prime. But because Retro, this is my point, not Memechi's, because Retro is still a Nintendo studio, you don't see Nintendo fans saying all the good ones at Retro have left. To them, Retro is just this autonomous entity of faceless drones that crank out Metroid games. And we're not going to bring up that it's had talent turnovers as well. It's maddening. It's maddening, Joe. This next criticism is something that I really had to fight as a teenager. And maybe it's because I'm a grown man in his 30s who doesn't give a shit anymore. I'm happily married, and I'm willing to wave my freak flag high that I love these games. But I think this one pretty much died with Bad Fur Day. Bad Fur Day was the best, kind of answer to this. Bad Fur Day was Rare's silly love songs when it came to the critique. Silly love songs being the Paul McCartney and Wings song from Wings at the Speed of Sound. And that was that Rare's games
Oh, everyone take a shot. Beatles reference.
The critique that Rare's games are just too damn cutesy. That I wouldn't be caught dead playing these baby games. This is something that didn't really crop up really when Donkey Kong Country was launched, because Donkey Kong Country was a game that really, I think everyone at the time kind of got behind. People of all ages loved the hell out of Donkey Kong Country. It wasn't until Donkey Kong Country 3 that I really started to see from the gaming magazines that... And
that game had quite literally a lot of kiddie stuff in it.
Yeah, it did. Literally, it had a character named Kitty, right? So, but that really started the trend, and you would see it with Diddy Kong Racing. Well, actually, I remember when Banjo-Kazooie and then Conqueror's Quest were announced E3 1997, and a lot of gaming magazines said more cute stuff from Rare, like very dismissively. And then this continued, through the Banjo years, Donkey Kong 64. What really killed it, I think, was Conker's Bad Fur Day, because that was just the best kind of answer to that criticism was, oh yeah, okay, well, here you go. Here's a foul game full of sexuality and scatological references.
Yeah.
And people were able to appreciate, I think, what Rare was doing, which... Again, Rare's games, they might have had like cute animals, but there was always that subversive element in them. Even in the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, there was a bit of subversion with like not like overtly like sexual jokes, but with things like Cranky Kong shitting on the game, and so you had like very dry British humor in the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, very self-effacing, deprecating humor, and then in the N64 era, things just got relatively raunchy. But I'm like wondering what spurred the Rare's games are too cutesy kind of...
I've got a couple of theories about this, actually.
Okay.
One of them is, I think it could be, in general, it's becoming more accepted for adults to enjoy cutesy things these days, and culture is allowing it more in this changing world. Another theory is, I think the people that make those kinds of criticisms are quite young themselves, and they're trying to be grown-ups, and they're just like adolescents or young adults who don't want to be surrounded by shit like that. And as we've gotten older, so have our peers, and we don't get exposed to people who make those sorts of criticisms anymore. Like, for instance, when I was a teenager, Game Boy Advance era, everyone laughed at me for playing Pokemon in school. You couldn't play Pokemon because you were gay and you were a baby. But I've not really seen...
A gaby, even.
A gaby! Yeah, and I think that's just because my peers were all teenagers, and that's probably what teenagers are still doing in school now, making fun of the kids playing those sorts of games, and we just don't see it anymore because we're grown-ups now, and we're allowed to play Kirby as much as we want.
We've created our own little community that celebrates playing those games. Yeah, definitely. But... I think what happened, honestly, it's the PlayStation. And hear me out. Okay, so the first generation of gamers from the 1980s aged up into college-aged adults. And that was right around the time the PlayStation came out. So, around the time, mid-90s, when the Super Nintendo was winding down, when the N64 was getting ready to launch, when the Dreamcast was coming out, we had the PlayStation. And at the time, as a Nintendo loyalist, I didn't even I thought the PlayStation was just gonna be one of those failed video game consoles that came and went, that was overpriced and then was forgotten about. That nobody really was going to buy the PlayStation. But it turned out the PlayStation was highly successful, and a large part of its audience were college students, that first generation of gamers who kind of graduated to the PlayStation, the ones who played the NES and maybe had a dalliance with the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. They then went on to the PlayStation, and so for them, video games were still very much viewed as kid stuff in the mid-90s. So to justify them becoming adults, no longer teenagers who were still playing video games, they kind of wanted to look for more mature fare to justify that, and that's what the PlayStation was. And so these were the same people who were writing video game magazines at the time, which was, the IGNs of the day. And so then that's where we got the Rare's games are just cute, and we have to point that out at every opportunity, lest we be viewed as infantile man-children at best and homosexuals at worst. So that's my theory on what happened. And obviously, now that Generation X is in their 40s, entering their 50s. It's really not something that, obviously teenagers are still going to, dredge that up because they're teenagers and they don't want to be viewed as kids. But I think there's decades now as fully established that you can be any age and play video games, that pretty much anything is on the table if you're a self-assured adult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's my take. Because, I mean, when, Retro made Donkey Kong Country Returns, you didn't hear, oh, this is baby stuff. This is for fucking prepubescence without any pubic hair.
Yeah.
This is bullshit. And to that I say, I shave my pubes just so I can play Donkey Kong Country.
Next.
Speaking of Donkey Kong Country, let's wrap this episode up by talking about critiques of the Donkey Kong Country series. And this can be the original trilogy. It can be Retro's duology. Hopefully one day a trilogy. But, Chad and I, back in season 1, we did an episode called Haters Gonna Hate. And it was right after Tropical Freeze. I believe it was August of 2013. And it was about all of the criticisms the Donkey Kong Country series was getting at the time in the backlash after Tropical Freeze's reveal, because Retro wasn't doing Metroid Prime 4. So we've gone over some of this stuff on the show, but it's been several years now, and again, the benefit of time can kind of give you new perspective. So I want to talk
let's not, without beating a dead horse, let's go over it again.
Without beating a dead rhino even. Yes. Joe, what are your thoughts? Well, what are some of the criticisms you noticed about the Donkey Kong Country series, and then your perhaps rebuttals to those?
Okay, well, I think I should probably go into that story that I used to promise to eventually tell, and eventually
what is
did
this?
Tell on the forums. This is one time I went on a date with some chap, and before we met up, we messaged for a bit, and he said I'm a gamer. I said, "Oh, terrific!" And I thought, what if he's a PlayStation or Microsoft gamer or something and he hates Nintendo? So I said, what do you play? He said, a bit of everything. All consoles. I'm a collector of video games. I said, I guess there's no reason for us not to get on then. I'm sure we'll get on like a house on fire. So we met at a bar. We sat down. We chatted about video games. And he said to me, I like a lot of games really, but if there's one series I absolutely cannot stand, it's Donkey Kong Country. I said, what on earth? Why not? Why the fuck not? What is wrong with you? And he explained the characters are just so cool and 90s and over the top. They look like Sonic's friends. They're so badass. And I'm Diddy Kong. I've got a red hat because I'm a badass with attitude. And I thought, I've never really thought about that. He's kind of got a point. And at this point, I thought, should I sleep with this guy or not? I did. It was good. But I did feel... but then I spent 3 hours in the shower, scrubbing frantically at my skin, feeling I'd betrayed the DK Viners. In fact, it's the reason I left the website. Yeah,
you pretty much did just stick a dagger through our heart with that one, Joe. So yeah, this is something that comes up, and it usually comes from Nintendo fans who were, again, trying to knock Donkey Kong Country down a peg or two. With no reference to pegging there, and that is that Donkey Kong Country is too 1990s. It's too 90s edgy,
Play it
the
loud.
play it loud era. Everything's got to be extreme, and which I find charming. Obviously, but only '90s kids really understand that. And these criticisms usually,
I can't help but think of the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show, and think maybe that's what they think Rare did to Donkey Kong.
Well, yeah, these critiques usually come from those gamers, Gen Xers, from the NES era, or they come from the younger side of millennials who like the GameCube generation of gamers onward. And, I've never particularly understood this. I get it because you play Donkey Kong Country and Diddy, or Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy has, the boombox, and, he does that. But, you're welcome.
And then just look at the whole character of Funky Kong.
Well, yeah, but, okay. So, Funky Kong is, like, at least started life as a parody of 90s surfing culture, which... Again, I know I brought this up on the show before, but I believe 90s surfing culture didn't reach you guys over there until like around 94. Like for us, it was like 91, 92 where 90s surfing culture was a thing. And it didn't really, like, I guess, make its way over the waves to Great Britain until... around the time Donkey Kong Country came out. So Funky Kong was kind of a contemporary reference. But we Americans viewed him as kind of just like kind of a throwback even back then.
I think, yeah, the whole character of Funky Kong comes with that conceit, that obvious sense of parody, exaggeration,
Right. And you look at all of the Kongs, and they're all all of these supporting Kongs, not really the main Kongs that you control in the original Super Nintendo games, maybe with the exception of Kitty.
It's still very much a product of the times, in the same way that if nowadays they would invented Hipster Kong, and his beard and his checked shirt.
All of the Kongs were kind of piss takes. The supporting Kongs were just ridiculous stereotypes. You had Funky Kong, who was the 90s dude. You had Cranky Kong, who was the old fucking bastard. You had Candy Kong, who was Marilyn Monroe with fur. You had Wrinkly Kong, who was the kindly grandmother. You had Swanky Kong, who was the skeevy ass huckster. You had you were gonna have Redneck Kong, who was fucking Redneck Kong. I mean, that was the joke with the Kongs. And I think because Funky Kong is one of the more popular characters, he's then kind of magnified over the entire series as, oh my god, this is actually just a bunch of 90s bullshit. But I look at something like Sonic the Hedgehog, and I'm like, why are these criticisms leveled at Sonic the Hedgehog? Because these characters were positioned and marketed as edgy and too cool for school and not your father's video game mascot. much more than the Donkey Kong characters ever were.
I think it's because the Donkey Kong characters are humorous, and there is that brilliant British sense of humor, whereas Sonic takes itself very seriously. It's up its own arse. That and the gameplays, especially in the games where those edgy characters have blossomed, the gameplay's not been very good. In the 3D installments I'm on about. Well, not only that, but that's more like the 2000s, really, the late 90s, early 2000s. So I think perhaps Sonic was just a bit too late to start trying to design characters that look like that.
I think this is just one of those like mindless criticisms that people level at it. And also because Donkey Kong Country is one of the few Nintendo franchises that was developed with Western mindsets. There are a lot of Japanese kind of cultural jokes in, say, Mario and Zelda that Western audiences, if they're not, Japanophiles, they do not get at all. And it makes the Mario and Zelda and a lot of the Nintendo properties seem like they're operating on this whole other level when they're really just playing to the home crowd. And that's what Donkey Kong Country did, only it was from a Western perspective. And because of that, it's a lot more obvious to us and then somehow seems more dated as a result, which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, Japan's kind of Japan. It's more kind of timeless in its sense of humor and whimsy.
Well, to us, it seems timeless. To them, I'm sure, there's stuff in the Mario series that seems very dated.
Yeah.
But, speaking of perspectives and the difference between Nintendo of Japan and Rare, I think the best way to end this episode would be to tackle the mother of all criticisms from the father of gaming or modern gaming. So the biggest criticism that gets leveled at Donkey Kong Country, the trilogy, but specifically the first game, is that it sucks because Miyamoto allegedly said it sucks.
Yeah.
The infamous quote about how gamers would put up with mediocre gameplay so long as the graphics were good. Which we still don't have confirmation if that quote is actually authentic or not. Or even if it was authentic, if Miyamoto said it out of bitterness or anger. Now, supposedly in some magazine, and this magazine does not exist anywhere in any online archive. We've hunted for it. We still can't find it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That this quote doesn't exist. That Miyamoto didn't say
it. Could have been said in Japanese.
And it could have been a translation error. Maybe, more malicious intent was attached to it than was actually intended. Because Miyamoto, we've had our ups and downs with our opinions of him over the years here at DK Vine, but we generally respect the hell out of the guy. How could we not?
I think when we found out he was the one spearheading Donkey Kong Country Returns, I think a lot of those Donkey Kong Country hates sucks because Miyamoto said so complaints disappeared, and our kind of bitterness disappeared also.
Well, for me, it was that, and it was him being the reason Diddy Kong is in Diddy Kong Racing. So...
Oh yeah,
he went to Rare and he said, "You've got to put Diddy Kong in this game, and you have my permission to use Diddy Kong." Like that. That's just like the coolest fucking thing in the world to me. And we owe Miyamoto essentially everything. We owe him the Donkey Kong universe as a result. Which is kind of ironic, now that we're worried that Super Mario Odyssey is going to bulldoze a lot of our fanon and beliefs as far as like what the Rare Archipelago is, and so far it'd be fun to do.
It'd be fun to be on that episode actually of the conversation.
well, so far there's been nothing really to wreck it as far as I'm aware. Like Donkey Kong Island has not manifested on the Super Mario Odyssey globe. So fingers crossed that they're not going to try to say Donkey Kong Island's on the Mushroom Earth. But there's always ways to fan wank our way out of a box, especially as a Rare-centric fan site. We're going to be fine. One of the reasons I really do respect Miyamoto is that he really does seem like a genuinely good person, and a person of good temperament as well. So when I hear this quote, I don't know what to think, and I want to believe it's not true. But I also am willing to concede that even if it is true, he said it in the heat of anger because, what was happening at the time was Donkey Kong Country was just this runaway success, one of the biggest hits Nintendo had had in years. And at the same time, Miyamoto was developing Yoshi's Island.
This lot of limey bastards have just made a game that people are raving about, not the crap you're spewing out. Why don't you make it like this game that all these British cunts have made, huh? Miyamoto's probably like, oh, it's not that good. God, guys, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, this is apparently what happened. There was internal pressure to make Yoshi's Island into a pre-rendered game to ride the wave of Donkey Kong Country's success. And Miyamoto just felt like, for maybe the first time he's ever been at Nintendo, ever since the arcade game Donkey Kong, took off, he was under kind of creative duress. He felt like he was not, or at least being challenged to not be able to do his own thing. And obviously he won out in the end, and Yoshi's Island, was released as he intended. But I could see him, with his back up against the wall for the first time ever, lashing out at Donkey Kong Country as a result. But I think that it's also unfair to view what Miyamoto says as, and we use this term a lot, word of God on DK Vine. I don't mean it in the sense that we usually mean it as when a creator says something, it's generally canon or to be viewed as canon. I mean it as the sense that people view Miyamoto as the video game god. And so what he says must be 100% accurate in the nature of our reality. So if he says Donkey Kong Country is mediocre, then people are going to believe it, which there is no way anybody could play Donkey Kong Country, the original or, especially the sequels, and think this is a mediocre experience. It might be lacking in certain areas, sure. I'll concede that. The original game, not the sequel. But it's still, 1, extremely polished, 2, extremely fun to play, 3, just busting at the seams with charm and just utter delight. 4, it's got one of the best soundtracks in gaming history. And 5, yes, the graphics were incredible for the day. So it seems like just one of these dick measuring contests that fans engage in, especially post Rare leaving the shores of Nintendo. Although this stuff was starting up even in the early aughts, when online culture, was really taking off and the internet was becoming a fixture in everybody's homes, people were getting very tribalistic even back then about which team are you on.
Yeah. So I'd say if we want a developer who seems to have a continuing vendetta against Donkey Kong Country, look at Sakurai. And no one's really gone, yeah, you know what, Sakurai keeps leaving Donkey Kong Country out of Smash Brothers, it must suck. People, I think we're not the only ones on the internet been like, why is it just a remix of one song over and over again in every game? And where's K. Rool?
I'll say this about Sakurai. I've lost complete faith in Sakurai. Do some market and customer research and come back to me. I would honestly not be surprised to see Sakurai go bust. Nintendo's money is all that is saving him now. Out of touch. Thank God he doesn't have K. Rool.
I fucking hate this asshole. I literally want to see him die. Wait, that's something else.
This has been a File 2 production.
Qué rico.